Move forward, Mayor Pro Tem. Do your thing.
All right, I would like to call on, Councilmember Hare, if you do not mind, would you like to do the invocation? I'll let Councilmember Thomas get settled.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Dear Lord, we call upon you, and we first just say thank you, Lord, for this privileged day that we did nothing to earn this day, and we thank you for it. Well, Father, before we go and I pray over the agenda and the things of the city, we ask you, Father, to look over on those families and those children and those parents and the administration there in Georgia, where once again some children and teachers, administrators lost their lives over nothing, for no reason. We ask you, Father, please, Jesus, to uplift their families and their friends, that city, that state, and give them the strength that only that you can give. And then, Father, as we move forward tonight with our agenda items, Lord, we ask you to let our minds be open and sharp and keen and on point, that there will be a difference tonight, that we will respect and work and honor each other's opinions. And Lord, we just thank you for so much, and help us to help our city to move forward. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice.
Thank you, Councilmember Hare.
Yes.
All right, if I could get a motion to approve the agenda. All right, I have first by Councilmember Davis, second by Councilmember Hare. So we'll go on to 5.0, other items of business, and I am going to turn it over to, yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Could I get a vote on the approval of the agenda?
So moved. On using a touch pass.
So 7, I'm sorry, that is unanimous with those present. And for the listening audience, the mayor is not here tonight. He is out on city business, so we are going to go ahead with the meeting. So with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Chris Colley. It's the Chris Colley Show today.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm going to have a little bit of support from some of my folks, so I don't get tired standing up here all evening. Thank you, Council and Mayor Pro Tem, for giving us this time to talk about some very important topics to our communities. So a lot of tonight is talking about affordable housing broadly. As we end with our third item tonight, we'll be talking a little bit more about economic development and some tools that we potentially have for that. But they all kind of have this same kind of concept of improving our community and improving the lives of our residents, starting with affordable housing. So this is the longest presentation that I've ever given. It's got a media agenda. I gave it to the UDO committee. I asked them to please tell me where to pull stuff out that wasn't necessary, and they said that there wasn't nothing unnecessary in here. So I'm going to beg for some patience from everybody. I'm going to go over the agenda real quickly here, and then what we found in that meeting was lots of questions popped up and got answered on the next slide. And so if y'all could kind of be patient with me and work through that, I'm hoping that I'll answer most of your questions by the time we get to the end. So tonight we're going to talk about affordable housing, the definitions, types, and benefits. What does that mean? We're going to talk about Fayetteville's income in this area, the ranges and limitations of that income. We'll talk about single-family housing and a market analysis that Longleaf Pine helped us share some information, and then we added some more to that to put together. We'll talk about rental market and the analysis of rents in our community. Then we're going to talk very briefly about the legal constraints with North Carolina state law and what cities can do, funding that we currently have available, what we're doing right now with our team, and then what are the gaps and opportunities and funding needs moving forward. So without further ado, so affordable housing is defined by HUD and is put pretty simply, right? Your housing is affordable if you spend less than 30% of your income on your mortgage, your rent, your utilities. Now, if you live in more of a rural area, they add in transportation costs and say that number is 45%. But essentially, if you do the math on your own home budget and 30% or less of your total household income is going to the house, you live in an affordable home. That's the definition. Now, there's a lot of different programs. There's a lot of different initiatives out there that call it slightly different stuff. You hear affordable housing, you hear workforce housing, you hear attainable housing. All of those things have small nuances and slightly different meanings. For the purposes of tonight, we're going to largely talk about affordable housing. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of affordable housing. So if you look at the chart, generally speaking, you got subsidized affordable housing that has some type of government involvement. And then you got unsubsidized affordable housing. I live in a nice little house right now that I just moved into, and it's a small house, and it is affordable to me. There is no government involvement in that, but I spend less than 30% of my income on rent and utilities. Right? I live in an affordable house. Now, there's public housing and housing voucher programs, so that's on the top left there. You can see that's targeted to the lowest income folks in our community. Also at that same level, you have homelessness programs. Now, those are different than public housing because they largely involve supportive services, case management, things like that. As you move forward, and some of what we're going to look at, because it's the most powerful tool that we have in our arsenal, is what's called LIHTC properties. That is the low-income housing tax credits. That has been part of IRS code since 1986 under Reagan. It allows very wealthy individuals to purchase tax credits at a discounted rate so that they can invest in affordable housing in lieu of income taxes. That money is then invested in by private developers in privately owned affordable housing. That housing pays taxes for the most part. There's a couple of nonprofits doing it, but if it's a for-profit developer, they pay taxes. It is discounted and counted a little bit differently than a market rate place at the state level. But I think that's something that's important, that this is quality, new construction housing that we're talking about when we talk about LIHTC properties. Moving down from there, you've got what's called NOAA, which is naturally occurring affordable housing. A lot of times that looks like older housing, right? Some of it you can look at as substandard, some of it you can look at as mobile homes, but we also have programs that our team puts in place to help care for some of that older housing in our community so that it remains at a high quality of housing stock and naturally occurring as affordable. We also have a down payment assistance program for people at 80%. That's the yellow one in the middle. That's federally funded money that helps folks get into a home. That's part of our Home Buyer Hero program. Then as you move up the income level just a little bit more, you get into apartments, right? You get into market rate apartments, a brand new construction one that they build out, let's say Cliffdale or Rim Road. That is a brand new market rate apartment complex that people at about 100% of the median income can afford to live in. We also have down payment assistance from those folks from locally funded money we got from the state. So it doesn't have all those federal rules to it, and we're able to go up a little bit higher to 120% of median income. Moving past that, you get into higher end 4- and 5-star apartment complexes, and you get into the for-sale homes that we see being constructed today. Some of that is workforce housing, and then it moves on up from there. And we'll talk a little bit more about single family and those market rates in a minute. The last thing I want to leave you with when we talk about what is affordable housing is this economic mobility. We know from dozens, if not hundreds of studies that affordability and overcrowding of housing is correlated with economic mobility, educational attainment, and crime rates. It's hard to do your homework when you're sharing a 3-bedroom apartment with your 4 brothers, mom, and dad. Another thing to keep in mind is that the goods and services in your economy are provided by those who need affordable housing. And those in affordable housing, if they can afford their housing, have more capacity to buy the needed goods and services in your economy. So affordable housing helps us create an economy that circulates local dollars and allows people to grow better than their start in life. So this kind of moves us into the income piece of that, right? So I just wanted to put this up there. It is stark when you look at this, right? This is according to American Community Survey and Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. This is for our area of Fayetteville. This is the median and average incomes by profession, right? So we just adjusted our police officers. This is prior information, historic information, so the police officers are a little bit higher than that now. But you can see a teacher, construction worker, someone that works in healthcare. I know the healthcare one was a little bit of a shock to some folks. There's a lot of folks in healthcare that aren't doctors and nurses, right? In fact, I know a nurse at Cape Fear pretty well, and when she's working in the emergency room, there's 3 or 4 people supporting her actions as a nurse that fall into that healthcare bundle. Right, but you can see here that a lot of these folks that we recognize on a daily basis fall into that very low income, moderate income, and that workforce bracket. And I'm going to try to use those green, yellow, and orange colors throughout the whole thing so we can kind of keep that in mind as stuff that we've got plenty of tools for, slightly less tools for, and then we get into kind of pushing the edge of what we're allowed to do with the orange. So the income ranges, this is a huge chart, right? The takeaway here is that most of our programs are total household income measured against the middle household income in our region. So that's the median income. So when I say area median income, that's the middle region, the middle income for this area, not necessarily the average. But there's a lot of information on here, so I put a couple of things in here to kind of help us navigate it. So somebody working in healthcare with a police officer and 1 child, they're going to be in that 140% of area median income, which is good news because City Council offers a program through our Homebuyer Hero, it used to be called Good Neighbor, that police officer, their spouse, and their child can get down payment assistance to assist with buying their first home. Next up is a teacher with a couple of years of experience and no dependents. They can get down payment assistance from our programs because they're at 100% of area median income. That is only through locally funded money that right now we got $1 million from the state about 1.5 years ago that we're using to fund that program. We've got a construction worker with a stay-at-home spouse and 2 children. They are at 60% or $60,000 in household size with 4 people. They're in that 80% of area median income. They can get down payment assistance that we get through our funding from the federal government to help purchase their first home. A retail or service worker on their own with no dependents is going to be at 50% of area median income. That person needs subsidized assistance to afford rent in our city. A healthcare worker with 2 children. This is a single mom who's working as a CNA or certified medical assistant or something like that. They need a subsidized rental to afford somewhere to live. So one of the really good questions that the UDO committee or the city manager, I can't remember which one, asked me was, how many people are at each one of those income ranges in Fayetteville? So we looked it up and pulled this together. And so this shows you the percentage of households at each of these income levels. So the green is people at less than 10,000, 15,000, and 25,000. That's going to be that low income that we talked about. Yellow is that moderate income level. Orange is more of the workforce, and then red gets above median income. And so you can see from this that the vast majority of people are populating to the left of the orange. Right? Yes, sir.
Councilor, you have this PowerPoint on your iPad. And if it helps, because you are doing a great job of trying to stay on time, maybe give them a minute to look at the slides to orient themselves, because I see some of them still making notes before we're moving on. But
you got it.
great
Yes,
job.
sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really want to not keep y'all here all night if I can, but slow me down just like that. That's perfect. So you can see the percentage of households at each one of those incomes. Just about 23% of people make $50,000 to $74,000 as their total household income. Going up to $200,000 or more is less than 5% of the folks here. So we do have and we all know this, right? We know that we have a pretty decent poverty rate here. We have a service and retail economy. And that comes with some of these wages that we see here. In fact, of the top 10 lowest paying occupations in Fayetteville, 5 5 of them are the most popular jobs in Fayetteville by employment. Office and administrative, food prep, sales, transportation and material moving, and education and library operations. That represents 64,000 employees in our community that are in the top 10 lowest paying jobs in Fayetteville, right? Forget all that census data stuff for a minute, because some of that is extrapolated and it's the best we've got, but it could be flawed. We went online and we looked at job postings for 5 different kind of professions in our community. And a Fayetteville police officer starting salary is at 50, a math teacher is at 49, a transit driver at 39, construction at 38, and a waiter at 27. And you can see what 30% of their monthly income results in to target rent on the right side there. So kind of moving into the single-family housing inventory part of this. First off, Angie and Zan at Longleaf Pine really helped me put this information together and shared with me some stuff, and I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that Longleaf Pine with a bunch of other realtors have gotten together and put together, I think it's a 9-county analysis of housing that's going to be presented later this month up in High Point. It's pretty ambitious, and I'm going to be driving up there to check out what they got to say on that. So I'm really interested to see what they say, not just about Fayetteville, but the whole region. Right now, we've got some good trends, though, at least positive trends. Back in 21, 22, and 23, the months of housing supply was less than a month on the market. And this year, it's gone up to almost 4, and in August, it was a little bit above 4. Now, what that means is that we're moving a little bit more towards equilibrium in the market. 5 to 6 months means that it's neither a buyer nor a seller's market. So we're still in a little bit of a seller's market right now. The number of homes for sale has gone up tremendously since 2021. Obviously, there were a lot of things happening in 2021. We've now got, as of 2024, the average is about 1,200 homes on the market. In August, it was almost 1,400. The interesting thing is that the days on the market is not overly long. It is longer than it was in 2021 when people were lining up to buy a house, literally. So as average for this year, we're at 22 days on the market. In August, it dipped back down to 11 days. That's a sign of a pretty hot market. The housing type. Now, back in 2020, when we presented our housing study, there was one chart that really drew a lot of attention, and that was the change from 2010 to 2018 in owner-occupied homes. So we pulled that updated data for 2022, and it's trended a lot better. So 53.5% of our homes were owner-occupied back in 2010. That dipped by almost 10% to 44% in 2018, and it has recovered by about 5% now. So that means that we're getting a lot closer, pretty close to 50-50 owner and renter. So when we talk about Fayetteville housing costs, there's a median and an average, right? So the median in August was $239, the average is $261. That means that houses are being sold higher than the middle point, right? The average is going up. The overall increase that we've seen in 4 years is about 52 to 54% increase in home cost. To take that average sales price and break it down, to have a $261,000 mortgage with a decent down payment, they're paying a little over $2,000 for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That requires a household income of $81,000, which goes back to that 120% of median income for a 3-person household. Interest rate plays a part in this too, right? 2021 interest rates were 2.96%. They've fluctuated quite a bit since then. In 2023, we saw it over 7%, but it's trending at 6.5% right now as of August. So we did pull a little bit of census information here. Now, this is 2 years old from the census, so it could have potentially changed. But owners with a mortgage in our community, 7,200 of them are paying more than 30% of their income for housing, and that's 30% of the owners with a mortgage in Fayetteville, right? Owners with no mortgage who are cost burdened and paying more than that 30% is 17%. So someone who lives in a house with no mortgage and is paying taxes and insurance, utilities, and other housing related costs is still spending more than 30% of their income on housing 17% of the time. Now, in the next presentation, when my housing manager gets up here, he's going to talk to you about some programs that we have long-standing that helped really low-income people buy their home and what we can do to influence that 17% number. Part of, if they don't have a mortgage on their house, most of these people are retirees on fixed income. And so taxes, property insurance, utilities, all those things, that's a significant portion of their earnings. So when we talk a little bit about housing types and activities, right now, about 2/3 of the housing in our community is single-family homes or townhomes. From there, the remainder of it, we've got a little bit of mobile homes still in the city limits, but then the rest of it is multi-unit, whether it's 2 to 4 up to hundreds of apartments. The age of housing, you can kind of see in the red box there. That is about 45% of our housing inventory and is older than 1979. New housing starts has trended a little bit better than 2019, but it's not a dramatic change. So back then we had 223 new housing permits pulled. In 2022 we had 392, and in 23 it was down just a little bit to 317. So those are new single-family houses that permits are being pulled to construct. One of the things that we talk about in affordable housing is missing middle, right? So that is housing types that are different than single family. It could be duplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, things like that. And so according to American Community Survey data, only 2.9% of housing stock is single family attached, right? So that's not rental, that's a single family home that is set right next to another one. I actually drove through a really beautiful neighborhood right off of Robinson the other day, where there were a bunch of little townhomes or 4 and 5 houses, single-family houses attached at the entrance to the neighborhood, and then it moved into single-family detached, and then it moved into larger market rate housing, and it really blended the neighborhood really nicely. But those things are, developers have to come forward with those alternative, plans, and council ultimately reviews those plans and then approves them. So moving to the rental. So before we do that, single-family housing, the key takeaway is that housing has gone up 50+% in the past couple of years. The manager and I were talking a couple of months ago, and he said, pretty much think about what you think a house is worth and add $100,000 to it. And every time I try to test that theory, it comes out right. Housing has gotten a lot more expensive nationwide. So moving on to rental. Our friends at FCDC, Robert, pulled me some really cool information from a database that he has that showed that demand for apartments is accelerating, but new supply for apartments is outpacing that demand. So in a perfect world, when supply is greater than demand, costs go down. That's not happening, right? Industry standard in multifamily is a 7% vacancy rate. When we underwrite financials for projects, we plug that in automatically. Right now in Fayetteville, we're trending towards an 8% vacancy rate, a little bit higher than that. But rent's still going up. And so when we try to explain that, one of the things that we can look at is the basic housing allowance, right, that military gets. So I looked up that number, and for an E4 with no dependents, that's $1,300 a month right now, closer to $1,400. So if I'm running an apartment complex at market rate, I know where my floor for rent is right there, The largest demand and what's being built outside of stuff that the government participates in is those 4 and 5 star rating apartments. Those are really nice architectural, high community amenities. They've got a community building, a pool, things like that. That's where the demand is coming from the private market right now. Council has worked with some developers and approved quite a few units to come online in the near future. About 600 of them are on the CoStar report saying that they'll be delivered in the next year and a half. Some of those, about 400 of them, are part of the Good Homes projects that we've seen come before council and get talked about in the newspaper and things like that as well. But when you look at rent per bedroom here, and I'm not going to read this chart to anybody, but please look at it when you've got time. We broke down across 3 different websites. We looked at the rent per bedroom and averaged that out so that you can see the number of units that are available right now today at different price points in our community. So fair market rents, I went back to 2015. I lived in Raleigh back in 2008, and I'm not going to put those numbers up here because they're just depressing. I could afford to live in nice, downtown Raleigh back then. But in 2015, you know, a one-bedroom apartment was a little over $600 a month. Now in 2024, it's a little over $1,100 a month. If you look at the numbers on that chart from 2023 to 2024, what you're going to see is about a 25% increase year over year. So I went to this website that analyzes rents, and it showed me the hot spots in North Carolina for very high fair market rents. It was the Boone, Asheville area, Charlotte, Raleigh, Wilmington, and here. Right? And so our fair market rent is 91% more expensive than the nation. Right? Not to mention that 25% increase year over year. So when we look at this last chart that shows the percent of income spent on rent, this is 2 years ago, right? And so in the red, you can see people who are spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And that was 2 years ago before it went up another 25%. So what can we do about this, right? So we've looked at some challenges, right? Single-family homes are more expensive and out of reach for some of our service economy for a significant portion of our workforce. Rents are increasing year over year. So the first thing to lay the baseline, and I know all of you know this because you're public servants and you're good stewards of our funds, that constitutionally we cannot take our tax money, our public money, and give that to somebody for a profit. We have to get in exchange for it. If I borrow a term from the attorneys, I think it's consideration, right? We have to get a public good out of it. It has to be some benefit to the public. So then state law and court cases and stuff have identified what that public good is. We've got a couple of laws that we can borrow from. Chapter 157 is housing authority law, but it also says that we can do the things that housing authorities do, even if there is a housing authority. So that gives us the ability to participate in projects for housing. 160D is like my favorite law ever because it says I can design programs for low and moderate income communities. That's it. It gives me all of that. We can do a lot to help folks, right? So what does all that mean is that affordable housing, typically from a legal standpoint, it means that 20% of the development is exclusively made for the use of low-income people. Low income is defined at 60% of AMI and below. We can do rentals and home ownership up to 80%. We can do home ownership up to 120% because we have justified it with some market information to say that the median income and the median sales price don't match up. We need to have down payment programs that go up to 120. One of the other things that we can do that doesn't involve money is we can create conditions to allow for more housing development. Those are general government powers. Those are y'all's, right? And so what that means is that you can make zoning decisions. You can allow for variances. You can do a lot of stuff that Dr. Newton is better equipped to talk to you about than I am to help enable a variety of housing types to happen, right? Those things come at a cost sometimes, though, and that's the balance that council has the fun job of being in, right? You know, you've got things in your UDO that define what you want to look like as a community. Do you back off of those things in favor of more affordable housing, or do you keep that balance and try to figure out how to solve problems another way? That's tough. It's just one line on this paper, but it's a very tough part. If you're curious about any of this or you think I'm making it all up, you can go to the Coates Canons on the School of Government. They've got a whole bunch of articles there. They're really easy to read. None of them are more than like 4 or 5 pages long. But they talk about examples that other local governments had done, and they're written by some attorneys that are almost as good as the attorneys that we've got here in Fayetteville. So what are we doing currently? We have our home investment partnerships is about $800,000 that we get a year. It requires a 25% match that City Council provides every year from the general fund. We've got the Community Development Block Grant, about $1.7 million a year. It does a whole lot of things, and it can be used for land and infrastructure. We've got a state grant for $1 million. That's allowing us to fund our down payment program for the next several years. Those two tools I talked about, the low-income housing tax credits, that powerful engine that we can take advantage of, the 9% is extremely competitive, which means that if you don't have the absolute perfect site in the perfect part of the city, you're not going to win one of those. We're fortunate enough that we've won a tax credit award almost every year, if not more than one, for 23 years. right? And we still have the problems that we have. Now, those tax credits, you can go online and look at LIHTC and look at the economic impact, and I'm going to not do a good job right now, but every $1 of LIHTC brings in like $6 of leverage financing and economic activity. Those are great projects. The 4% are really interesting, though. The 4% are non-competitive. As long as you follow the rules of the program, you can access that financing source. The problem is 9% is more than 4. So that means that we have to put a lot more money into those projects to make them happen. We've only had a handful of those projects over the years. And right now, when I talk to affordable housing developers, they say that we need about $6 million to close that gap. One thing that those projects can do is they don't have to be in the absolute perfect place, right? They don't have to be on Cliffdale or Hook Loop where we've got, lots of shopping, lots of employment. They could be in some of our more struggling neighborhoods, and they could locate those projects there to be part of a redevelopment effort. So we would need a local developer for that, but I need money to be able to, talk to them because it puts they put a lot into making one of those projects viable. So right now, all the money that I got in my bank account is about $4.3 million to do this type of stuff. So what are we currently doing? We're gap financing large developments. Council's approved $6.1 million in the last 2 years to support large-scale developments, mostly LIHTCs. Financing small-scale developments. Me and my housing manager have met without fail with anyone who called our office and said, I want to learn more about affordable housing, I want to build affordable housing. We don't have a lot of small-scale developers willing to build 4 and 6 and 10 units of affordable housing right now, but we do have the financing tools to work with them. Down payment assistance, $20,000 to $30,000 for qualified first-time home buyers. We started that program 3 years ago. I got here 4.5. So, once we identified this, we brought a consultant in, we created the program and put it in place, and we're open and available. If y'all remember the last time we talked about Home Buyer Heroes, the only thing I can do is make an attractive program, market it, make sure every lender in our community knows about it, and make sure as many people as possible go to our home buyer education and get ready. Right? I can't make more homeowners. All I can do is set the conditions for people to become homeowners. Education, that home buyer workshop, we help fund that through Kingdom CDC. We fund them. They meet monthly. We gave them a little bit of extra money to move from Spring Lake into Fayetteville, and now they host those classes monthly at FTCC. Resource navigation. If you call my department, they will do everything possible to help you find resources for housing. We update our website weekly. Rehab of existing housing stock. This is really cool. When I got here, we spent $250,000 a year with Fayetteville Urban Ministry to rehab existing housing. Now we're up to almost $800,000 this year, and we brought in Habitat for Humanity to help do that too. So if you know a low-income senior who is struggling because their roof is damaged, they don't have air conditioning, their water heater is out, they can call Fayetteville Urban Ministry or Habitat, get on their extensive wait list, but we've got enough money to help them. And these are grants, right, not loans. And then we can finance single-family construction. So a couple of weeks ago, Keisha Parker was up here talking to you about some lots that we have. I got up and kind of pitch hit a little bit through that. So we've got 27 city-owned lots that are suitable for single-family construction. That's like having money, right? So they don't have to buy lots. They can come in and get a lot and build a house on it. And so what me and the housing manager and my assistant director are doing right now is we're developing a written program and an RFP to similar to what Durham had done, except for Durham only had 14 lots on theirs, right? And to say, we've got some land and we've got money. And if you build a modest house for an income qualified person, we can give you the property and help finance the construction. And so we're trying to make it that simple for people to navigate and see on our website, but that's essentially the value proposition that we're offering, right? So what are the gaps and needs? That 4% LIHTC I talked about, those are big projects, 100-plus units of affordable housing. Like I said, it can be paired with redevelopment of lower-income communities and mixed income. Because it's not so competitive, they can actually put mixed income in it with the 9%. The lower the income, the better. And so they get as low as they can possibly go. But you could actually develop mixed income here through income averaging. But it's expensive. It needs about $6 million right now in the current market. We need some small-scale developers that want to build those quadplexes, triplexes, 10-unit apartment complexes. Land banking, I know that that got brought up earlier this week. City council could consider foreclosing on properties where taxes are owed or unpaid liens are there and use it for affordable housing or sell it at fair market value. Either way, you're returning that property to active, responsible ownership. In some cases, I actually got to talk to the folks up in Flint, Michigan. While y'all were in here talking, I called him, and the guy was working late. He actually told me a story about a piece of property that had been in the family for a long time. They had unpaid taxes on it. They foreclosed on it, and it allowed 2 of the siblings that still lived in town to buy the property from the 7 heirs at foreclosure and then build a house on it. And so that is one of the significant tools that local governments have to keep property actively in our economy and being utilized. It does come at a cost, right? That's grandma's house. And that, again, don't envy the job y'all got. I'm happy with mine. But there's also a piece of this that Chapel Hill does really well. They have a strategic plan, and they go out and buy land in strategic places. That's definitely an option here. A lot of the places that we would look to try to buy land to do redevelopment projects, the air issues, title issues are generally a big challenge, right? But I would not recommend doing that with just us. I would want to bring in some type of consultant to help navigate where it makes sense for us to strategically acquire land and for what specific purpose are we looking to do it. And then single-family financing. I'm going to be pretty proud of what we get done with once we finish putting this program out and putting the RFP out to say, we've been doing this at Habitat for a long time. We deal with Kingdom CDC, and so we want to make it easy to navigate and simple for anybody who can come forward is an experienced home builder to say, I'm willing to take money from the city to finance single-family construction, and I'm willing to commit to putting an income-qualified first-time home buyer in the house. And so we're trying to make that as easy as possible and easy to digest and understand. So that brings us to the housing opportunity bond and, where are our funding gaps and what do we do moving forward. So if I look across the entire state of North Carolina, keeping in mind those laws we talked about and what we're already doing, there's 4 things that we can do with a housing opportunity bond. Rehab low-income homes. I got that covered, right? I use a lot of grant money to do that every year. Finance new single-family or multifamily construction. Land bank in order to produce that new single family or multifamily, and then down payment assistance. I got down payment assistance covered right now. So when we think about that $12 million of borrowing capacity that council has, last year y'all supported the Merchant Choice community and my department's efforts by committing up to $6 million for that. The application changes every year, so we'll have to come back to you and look at whether we need that full $6 million or not. In order to have a successful application. We're meeting with HUD next week to get a debrief on choice neighborhoods and find out what the next steps are to move forward so that we can continue applying for that. As I mentioned a couple of times, about $6 million is needed for one 4% LIHTC project. I would not go with the first thing that came up. I would find something that is impactful to this community and provides affordable housing if I were to recommend to council to invest that kind of money in one project. Like I said, currently I've got 3 to 4 years of funding for down payment assistance for workforce housing. And right now we don't have any land banking strategy or funding for that, which, that money could be used for as well. Thank you all for your patience. I'm at the end of this. I know it was a lot. Give me your best shot.
So, thank you very much, and for everybody that's not on the UDO committee, you can see why it's such important information. So, you did a great job. So, I'm going to go to Councilmember Hare and then Councilmember Benavente.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thanks, Chris. I think you did a pretty good job in explaining all of this, and I think some of my stuff got answered, but give me a little more clarity on the 6 point, and I know we've had the discussion, the $6 million for the Merchant Choice application, and where are we in that process? Because I thought that the application was already done, and whatever we needed with the amount of money that we needed with the application to file the application, I think we had done, I can't remember what it was, like 1.5 or whatever the amount was. So And I do remember us talking about the 6 million.
Yes, sir.
But where are we now that you are having, that it may be a possibility of needing the additional to get to the 6 mil if the application has already been done?
So, every year the rules and little pieces of the application change slightly. When I came to council and identified that we needed $6 million in funding to be competitive for choice, first off, council said yes that day. Second off, we had an outstanding question to HUD about an unusual aspect of our project, and we went with the most conservative reading of their rule book. About a day and a half before the application was submitted, they came back and told us that we could go with what we wanted to do. And so that essentially took our grant. If you remember, we were a little disappointed that we were only going for $27 million. Well, our final grant ended up being 39 or 40.
Right.
And that was because of that one decision made by HUD. So that changed the math on how much we need and what we need it for of that $6 million that council pledged.
But even,
Yeah.
but, and I may not need you to go any further, but
Yeah.
I thought that the application was already in, and
Right,
that we were
yeah.
waiting on the results of
Yes,
we
sir.
last filed. What was
So,
that, June?
Yeah,
In
so
June,
we
July?
submitted that application, and then after that, we were shortlisted. So out of 20-ish, 20-something people that applied nationwide, we were selected for a short
Right,
list.
right.
We put together a pretty awesome tour of the community.
Yes,
We
I
used some community ambassadors. The Umoja folks came and performed. We had local
Yes.
businesses provide lunch, and we knocked it out of the park by all accounts. Unfortunately, the choice program did not have enough money to fund our application, and so we did not get funded this year. We are meeting with them next week to find out what we can tweak in our application and what I can come back to council and talk about, or come to the community and talk about, so that we can be successful in the next application.
Okay, and I think my last question may be, Mayor Pro Tem, you mentioned that and I'm familiar with the Fayetteville Urban Ministries, and you spoke about the wait list, but you stated something that if a resident needed whatever the help that they need, that they could go to the Fayetteville Urban Ministries, get on this, you said extensive waiting list. Do we give them any funds?
Yes, considerable amount. So about $800,000 this year went to Habitat and Fayetteville Urban Ministry for emergency repairs of low-income homeowners, mostly seniors.
And do you know how long that wait list has been? Have you received any kind of response back from citizens who said, well, I've been on the list for how long?
Every once in a while, somebody pops up. Jeff, can you think right offhand about how long the wait list is right now?
It changes from time to time. Again, somebody may apply and their priority, their need is more pressing than somebody that's currently on the list. They do contact all those people and let them know you are, in our top 10 that we're working on right now, and somebody came in about that. So, not that people are getting pushed around on the list just on a whim, but I know we're currently working through both agencies, probably 20 applications right now that we're actively seeking to work on properties.
And so it's still good for us to push folk,
Yeah,
invite
so,
them to call? Okay, all right.
yes, sir.
Thank you.
I actually put a finer
Chris.
point on it. I'm jumping ahead to the next presentation that Jeff's going to give real quick. So over 25 years, we assisted 425 homeowners with our prior programs.
How many?
It's going to be on this presentation here, but it's 425 over 25 years. In the last 2 years, with Fayetteville Urban Ministry and Habitat, we've assisted 135 homeowners. So I don't have the math to project that out, but that's a heck of a lot better than what we were doing. And it's because we're using them and not necessarily staff to go through all the individual steps, and it's a force multiplier for us.
Well, thanks, Chris, and I've always enjoyed what you have been doing since you've been with us. You're doing a pretty good job. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Hare. Councilmember Benavente?
Can you go back to the slide where you said that we had, let's see what it was titled, to help you out here. Fayetteville fair market rents. Could you say more about being 91% more expensive was trying to follow you there. Could you say more about the slide again?
Yeah, so, I mean, that means that the fair market rent in this area is higher than 91% of the country. And it just so happens that we're also 91% higher than the state overall as well. So those are two different numbers. They just happen to be the same, but I combined them there.
And I know you said there's just a confluence of reasons why.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening all across the country right now. Why it trends higher here, I definitely think that. So when I talk to national developers about Fayetteville and I tell them what the fair market rent is here, or I even tell them what the HUD adjusted rent is, they're like, oh, that's higher than we thought it would be. Mm-hmm. Because they looked at our median income, they looked at economic indicators, and the best guess that I have is that the base housing allowance has a severe influence on the floor for our rents.
And going back to the Fayetteville jobs slide, I guess it's number 8. I appreciated what you said about how, most people are to the left of that orange bar. Because I think sometimes when we talk about median income, the folks in the red kind of buoy that number up, but really most people in Fayetteville are making, again, like you said, left of the orange. Somewhere in those articles, those Coates articles that you had shared with us, are there some strategies in there that council needs to be looking at? Is it the land trust? Is that really the difference maker? Is there something in there that we're not prioritizing just yet that's going to help support the folks to the left of that orange bar?
So when I think about land trust, right, and I think about the two examples that I talked about tonight, starting with Flint, you have cities that were founded on the auto industry that it left. And you have entire blocks of houses with no real ownership, right? And so they enacted a land trust, which is easily recognized as one of the best land trusts in the country. If you go to the Coates Canyon article about land trust for local governments in North Carolina, the first word in the article is Genesee County's land trust is, because they're using that as an example. They're doing that for a very specific reason, right? They need to return those properties to active ownership after people abandon the city, right? That's pretty dire. And the Michigan state law was actually changed to allow for the activities that they do to happen. When we look at Chapel Hill, very different situation. Chapel Hill is frantically trying to make a space for the people who live in Chapel Hill and work in Chapel Hill to stay in Chapel Hill, right? And so both of those are land trusts for very different reasons. Both of them have one thing in common, though. They're not done by the city government, right? They're done by some nonprofit that's been empowered to buy and sell properties, right, for the betterment of the community. Could we do something like that here? Does it have an impact on marginalized communities being able to have collective ownership and have the, set the direction of where they're going? Absolutely. I talked to a church recently with large property about a developer coming in and building on their property. And I said, hey, you don't even got to sell your property. Just give them a 99-year ground lease. It's still your property, because the land is important. And I know I'm not answering your question right now, but, there's specific problems and specific strategies, and a land trust addresses some of them. It's not a bad idea for forward planning in a community like this where we expect to grow and we want to direct that growth. But to help those extremely low-income people, the best thing we got going for us right now is increased funding with multifamily developers to get rents low to where they need to be.
Well, I asked a very broad question, so I think you included some good context. I've always been most interested in land trusts. Chapel Hill, they call it the Community Home Trust in particular. And I think about areas around North Carolina that did not kind of consider what happens when, just like you said, it might not be as dire as no one's coming back, but certainly if the children and the grandchildren aren't necessarily interested, that's still, not great. That's still a neighborhood that's got an aging population and houses that are potentially going to get bought up by the corporate landlords that are transforming neighborhoods into sort of this mismatch of single-family homes and then this like super modern, kind of gaudy looking thing that just kind of stands on its own. And eventually the entire neighborhood is gentrified. And when I talk with my community members about what they're seeing in Durham and in Raleigh, and they're seeing sort of the pattern sort of happening. Okay, well, right now, aging neighborhood, no one's buying the property, except we're hearing that someone is kind of making cash offers and selling reverse mortgages on everybody. They start to see those next steps, and I guess it's one way I've seen communities take control back is by establishing within themselves community home trusts. I mean, we've already kind of taught community members, community watches, for example, how to manage grant money for public safety. What does that look like when we teach community watches how to establish maybe a community home trust for themselves in their own neighborhoods? Has that ever been a direction that we've considered, or is that sort of, a kind of a leap, a quantum leap?
Did you and I talk to the same community watch commander today?
Were they in District 3?
Yeah. I actually had that conversation with a community watch leader today about some experience that I had down in Florida with a neighborhood association getting into the housing development game in their own neighborhood. I think that's a wonderful idea. I think if a community watch or any other neighborhood organization wants to stand up as a 501c3 and come talk to us about what that would look like, we would be excited to be a part of that.
But I guess the same way we've kind of set up like the training for folks to manage the money with FTCC, have we ever thought about getting really, I don't want to say aggressive, but just very purposeful about saying, hey, we're going to work with the FTCC folks to kind of set up what that would look like for people to take a series of classes over the course of a year, maybe. I mean, it's certainly not a just jump right in like the community safety grant is. This is, real estate. But, is maybe that's something that the council has to say, make that a priority?
So I think we're dipping our toe in that right now by
Already?
trying to
Okay.
put out a very easy to read and digestible single-family housing program. I don't know how to say this without sounding conceited, but
No.
I think I would have to teach that class.
I love it.
And I have a whole other job.
Understood,
And
understood.
but I think that we're moving in the right direction
Okay.
to make this stuff more accessible.
Be patient, I guess you're saying.
Wait about a month and look at what we put out and let us know if you like it.
Last question. Fayetteville Ministries Nehemiah project, you said that that's been refunded. I just remember a lot of folks this is maybe a year and a half ago, looking for that money, applying, finding out there wasn't any. I'm just curious, are there efforts to kind of make that maybe more user-friendly process? I think some folks, I've seen some applications recently that you guys have put out for participation where I feel like people are going through like a wizard, like, are you over the age of 75? Yes. Then he goes to your next part. Then are you under this level of income? Just something to kind of help people, access this stuff, because we're already dealing with a population that maybe isn't super, or maybe can get frustrated when it's not super user-friendly. And when I've said, try the Nehemiah project again, they kind of balk at it and say, I tried, and they didn't have any money, and then they put me through these loops, and it didn't end up going anywhere. And now I'm having a hard time telling them to go back and for them to take it seriously. So just wanted to share that feedback and would want to hear maybe more about how that's going to maybe have a little more focus on that part of it.
So two things
Yeah.
there. One is when I talked about Habitat and Fayetteville Ministry being a force multiplier for us, that doesn't come without a cost. We're now contracting with nonprofits who hire and retain people at nonprofit wages, right? And so y'all saw Johnny come in here and get a key the other day. I don't know how Johnny does what he does, but it ain't for love of money, right? I will say, though, that they have been serious about addressing issues, making it easier. We've taken a pretty gigantic baby step this year in that we put them into our neighborly portal, and so that they're starting to use it. And my hope is that in the next year or so, as they develop that comfort and are able to retain the staff that they have now, which are all great folks, that we're able to actually put that online for someone to apply through the neighborly portal. The last thing I'll say is that, generally speaking, if you encounter somebody who's had substantial challenges with Habitat or Fayetteville Urban Ministry, use the council request process to get that to us so that we can address it with them. Most of the time, it's a misunderstanding or or different words are being used for folks. Every once in a while, there was a problem about 2 years ago now where money wasn't in place fast enough and they had to pause operations. We have dramatically fixed that. Finance got with us, legal got with us. We started forward planning. They had a contract effective with money in place on July 1 this year. Yes, sir. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you done? Okay. Okay, so Councilmember McNair?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have a question on the behalf of a citizen, one of my residents. She's 85 years old, and she has a side screened-in porch built onto her house. However, she's needing to build a handicap ramp, but due to, I guess, they didn't get a permit to build the extension to her house. And so now she has to tear the porch down, and she doesn't have the money. So does the rehab existing house stock program, the urban ministry and Habitat, apply to her? I have to give her an answer back today.
So,
Today.
So let's remove the unpermitted work from the equation for just a second. So Habitat and Fayetteville Urban Ministry both do ramp work. Our program funds emergency repairs, and if they're there for an emergency repair, they'll also do ADA access. They have other funding sources to do some ADA access, like ramps and things like that. Now, adding in the unpermitted deck piece of it and saying that some of that is outside of my department, right? That's a specific challenge that I think it might be tough to navigate. It's hard to, attach a ramp to something that was unpermitted. I think maybe, if you could give us a buy for a day, that maybe Kelly and I can talk about that one and see if we can find something else out. But,
Okay.
The unpermitted thing is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. But also the Council on Aging has ramp programs. There's a couple of other, I think Action Pathways may have a ramp program. So there's folks out there to do that. I think the unpermitted deck thing is probably the biggest hiccup there. So if you'd like, if you can send that on to me and Kelly, we'll A, see if we can find a resolution to the unpermitted deck and way forward, and then B, give you a couple of nonprofit resources.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Yes, ma'am.
Christy. Thank you.
Okay, so Councilmember Davis has to leave, so we need to make, I guess you need to ask and we can vote on it, correct? Huh? Yes.
No.
I guess second? All right, second. All right, so if I could get a vote for that? All right, we are, okay, that is 8-0. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all so much. Thank you.
Okay, with that being said, I will go to Councilmember Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. First, let me clarify a couple of things that was said here tonight. One, when it comes to Flint, Michigan, the reason that a lot of people left Flint was because of the water crisis, not because of the motor manufacturing companies leaving. That was 20 years ago. Another reason why a lot of military are renting property is because Fort Bragg had some housing issues with their individuals years ago, which they had to tear down a couple of buildings, which made everybody qualify for VHF and to move for housing off posts. On that note, let me talk about some of the things that you had clarified about what is considered affordable homes. And you gave us a list, but you did not mention tiny homes. And the reason I say that is because as I visit other cities, i.e. Baltimore, Philadelphia, Salisbury, Maryland, I have sent the mayor pictures of these tiny home communities. How come that wasn't part of your presentation? is the first question. And two is, what can we do to get developers to, and you gave a lot of reasons why we should have developers, and you also mentioned that your job is to provide the opportunity, not to get them. We have the property, we have the money, but how come they're not coming?
All right, so let's start with the tiny home one. So I intentionally, when putting this presentation together, did not talk about any specific project delivery methods. When we talk about tiny homes, there's kind of two pieces there. One is for a single person in their 20s or so that, you know, has a minimalist lifestyle and doesn't need a big old house, right? So they have a more affordably built, smaller house that you know, would be more the tiny home thing, right? Those can be in like cottage court communities where you've got a couple of them around a common area and things like that. That is affordable by the nature of the fact that it is less expensive, right? If they were to come to us, we would help finance that project under the condition that the sales price and, you know, and that the person that it was sold to remained in a legally affordable, right? 80% of area median income and below. Same thing for rentals. We'd absolutely do that for a rental as well. The other tiny home concept that gets a lot of traction is for supportive housing for homeless, right? And so the challenge isn't the land or the financing. The challenge is the 24/7 presence on site that's required in those types of communities, right? We've had a dozen folks in the past year come forward and talk about tiny homes and things like that, you know, and we've been open and receptive every time. I don't know that we own any individual collections of land that are all together and enough to make one of those cottage court communities, but obviously the opportunity is definitely out there. And that if they were willing to rent to income restricted folks or sell to income restricted folks, we would absolutely help finance it. The second part was, if you remind me again.
Developers.
Yeah.
And let me just also add that as I visit my daughter in Knightdale, if you travel through Buffalo Road from Raleigh all the way to Knightdale, they're probably building over 7,000 apartments on that one street.
Yeah.
With a new Sheetz, a new Publix. Traffic is murder there now.
Yeah.
On just that one street. If they can get developers, what is precluding us from doing the same?
Yeah, so I would just kind of reframe that, and they're not getting developers, right? The developers are building there. And so there's a lot of things that go into that, right? I mean, the changing market conditions and influx of population. You know, that we say retail follows rooftops. Well, rooftops have got to follow people, you know, and so you know, all of those things kind of go into that. One thing that I have made a priority since I got here a little over 4 years ago, almost 5 now, is to create relationships with developers in Charlotte and Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill and Winston-Salem and anywhere else that they would talk to us, so that they got my phone number and email address and that we can talk about those things. I also have relationships with the local developers here. We are absolutely open. You know, I do think that, and our third presentation tonight can talk about a little bit more proactives that we could consider going into, that, you know, is a little bit, but not extravagantly more proactive than we already are. I would say our posture is already fairly proactive. It comes down to things that are kind of outside of our short-term control, not outside of our control, but short-term, which is markets, you know, population, influx, demand, all of that.
Let me just add another question, since you mentioned population 3 times in your statement. I was reading somewhere where every time a city creates 2 jobs, they need 1 more additional house. How are we ever going to catch up if we keep creating jobs and not have enough housing for them to live in?
So I'd have to look at how many jobs we created last year, but I do know that we had 317 new housing starts last year. So if we netted 600 plus jobs, and that theory would kind of prove out, you know. But that's also single family houses, not the multifamily where, you know, the demand, that supply is outpacing demand right now, and we've got another 600 on the horizon to come online, you know. So, I mean, these are great questions. They're very complex, and they are only slightly outside of the scope of the affordable housing thing.
I got you.
But not outside the scope of my department.
I'm going to give you one more. During my chat and shoot yesterday, I had a veteran, and you mentioned about how individuals are on a fixed income. How can we get veterans who are on a fixed income that are 100% disabled take advantage of some of your programs, mainly when it comes to taxes?
So taxes are handled at the state
I know,
level across
I know,
the board,
I know.
right?
But that was their question.
Yeah, well, but I will say that, you know, we've had some luck navigating through our down payment assistance with some veterans. The VA can sometimes be tricky, and if they're using their, and I don't understand this, Jeff does, but their VA certificate, you can't get a better deal than that sometimes. But
I got it.
but the VA will work with us to bring our down payment assistance into the deal as well.
Great presentation, Chris. Thanks for all the information.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Thompson. So I will go back to Councilmember Benavente for a second. You good? So I have a few questions. So first of all, I want to go back to the LIHTC, the 4%.
Okay.
So if I recall when we were in our meeting, is that the one that a lot of cities use? So can you explain that kind of in detail to the council so they can, because we haven't used this that much, correct?
Not at all. We've had a couple of them that were paired with some other things. But generally speaking, the 4% are you can income average, so you can get a wider range of incomes. You can place them in different places in the community.
Okay, go ahead.
But they take a lot of local dollar investment. And that is kind of the challenge there. So when you go to growing communities, and you know, I hate to say big cities, but when you go to Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, they are engaging in the amount of financing needed for a 4% tax credit.
So the point that I'm trying to make is when you go to Nightville and you see all these apartment complexes coming up, can we assume that they are using this? Because when we had the presentation, if I'm not mistaken, I heard that Charlotte, Raleigh, Winston-Salem, you know, these are the things that the cities are coming in and doing to produce all this multifamily housing.
Yeah, I mean, the market-driven housing is definitely a huge component of it, but, you know, there's no way that, and you can go on the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency website, and by you, I mean I can do that and look and see what's been approved in Knightdale. But yes, in most large growing areas, the Housing Finance Agency is trying to get those deals made in those communities.
So the point I was trying to make is there are cities that are growing by leaps and bounds that have been, I'm assuming they've been using this for quite a while.
Yes.
Something that really hasn't been in our wheelhouse, and I think it's something that we really need to take hold of and study to get this moving. So we will continue to be, at the minimum, the sixth largest city. So my other question is that back to the slide where Councilmember Benavente was, slide 8. So what I see yes, this one right here. You said that more people are to the left than they are to the right of the orange. So I'm looking at the orange that, you know, our income from 50 and above. As I was kind of doing the percentages, it was kind of like we're a little bit over 50% on the 50 and above. And I kind of did it as like 45% from the orange, not counting the orange, and below. So to me, that is the area that we really have to concentrate on. Is that?
Yeah, I think I'm following. I basically looked at it as the orange being a line and what's on each side of it.
Right.
But if you incorporate the orange,
you're correct on
absolutely.
that. But
yeah.
I mean, it shows that we are kind of moving up than where we were 5 or 6 years ago. Maybe?
I didn't do that comparative. I mean, yes, no doubt that the area median income is higher than it was 5 years. I had no doubt about that.
Okay,
yeah.
and that's, but it seems that we are moving, it's a process, but we are moving towards the right direction. So those are my questions, and I guess my next question is, the 6 million that we put aside for the Murchison Road choice, was that put in with ARP money?
No, that was part of your borrowing capacity with your housing opportunity plan.
Okay, so that, but when we pulled it over, it didn't go into ARP money?
No.
Okay, so we're not at risk of that expiring or?
And there is a timeline for the expiration of the authorization, the referendum's authorization, but that is several years out. So 8 years in total, so we've got 6.5 left, give or take.
Okay, so my question is for you and for council, do we take that 6 million and put it to something else in affordable housing, or do we keep it where it is?
I think I'll know a bit more about how the application might look different next week when we talk
Okay.
to HUD. I would say that, you know, if council is interested in something like putting $6 million in a 4% project, if I got a significant amount of nods around this table, that changes my conversations with housing developers significantly.
And when you say it changes it,
Yeah.
does it change it in more housing, more?
Yes, it
that-
opens up more possibilities, right?
Okay, so I think that is something that we really, as a council, need to look at and what direction we are going to move in. And we will not find out about the Murchison choice when we're applying for it again, but it'll be another year, correct?
Right, and that last minute decision by HUD changed that $6 million math that was needed.
Right.
And I just don't know, I can't tell you how much is needed for next year's application until we talk, you know?
Got it.
Right.
Got it. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Councilmember McNeil, did you? Well, my thing says she was first. Okay, so if McNair, you good, okay, Councilmember Thompson?
I just want to piggyback off a question that you just got finished asking. Now, Chris, I thought you told us that it was best that we did not put all of our money in that 4% LITO. Is that correct?
No, sir, I think that it's a significant investment and commitment by council to put that kind of money into a single project. But that's the kind of money that it takes to bring to market one of those projects. Honestly, I try to kind of stay out of the good, bad, indifferent piece because that's one of the fun jobs y'all get and I don't have to do. But, you know, it is a substantial commitment, no two ways about it. That project is going to be located in one place in the city.
Right.
Right. But it is what's needed.
Okay. Second question. I had a conversation with the mayor of Leland, North Carolina, which is the fastest growing city in the state of North Carolina. Do developers follow that trend?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilmember McNair?
Thank you, ma'am. Mayor Pro Tem, is it okay that I name a particular subdivision? It is? Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure. I guess I want to know how to approach, like Sunset Mobile Home Park. Most of those individuals that live there are renters, and they have very low income. So what type of approach and what type of programs would they qualify for? But, you know, I have a serious desire to help those individuals, but I don't know how to approach that type of situation.
Is this a 3 corporate? Yeah. I don't know if I'm gonna get in trouble for this or not, but hypothetically,
Are you gonna get in
right?
trouble?
Hypothetically, if a developer were to reach an agreement with the large property owners in that area to buy that property and build affordable housing on it, and come up with a relocation plan for the folks that live there temporarily until the new development were built, we could help finance that.
Relocate.
That is really and truly the only thing that can happen there.
So everyone has to be relocated.
You
that lives
have
there.
to build more financially viable and more stably secured affordable housing than a mobile home park.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
It probably is a separate conversation that we can work to develop to talk about the different housing types, mobile homes being one of them, tiny homes being the other. For a while, when I first came in 2004, 2005 era, Councilmember Hare remembers that we had a substantial number of underperforming, dangerous, inadequate mobile home parks that had just been allowed to languish. And the council, with pushing staff, we were able to work to close up some of those places, which really, I still remember Councilmember Evans saying, they're not fit for people to live in. He was a little bit more colorful than that. And when you get on MacArthur Road, you go through some in Deep Creek, Shaw Mill, Bonnie Doone. I'm not sure about over there, but you go through some of those areas. We were able to and many of the homes, as you saw, and I think on our trip, sir, and yours as well, when we went through, some of the mobile homes are just vacant. They're just people
Just sitting there.
just sitting there. And but one of the things that stuck with a lot of the staff from that time, and again, if we're in a different place, because the mobile homes, manufactured housing the concept of it has changed. Now it is truly it's a housing choice. I mean, it's tiny homes are a part of that. You know, people spend good money to live in shipping containers. That may be an opportunity for us for another presentation to actually talk about that. But for a long time, we were not encouraging people to do mobile home parks. And as a matter of fact, I don't even know what our zoning is to do one. In many of the mobile home parks, the people may not even own the home.
You don't.
They're just renting the lot. And in some of the places when the mobile home parks are, the units are owned by management, people just walk away because they can't find the title. And depending on the age of the mobile home as well, you can't move them. You have to dismantle them on site. This would be a really good joint conversation with you and with code enforcement, because it's one place on looks like on Country Club right now, in my area, where they look like they're trying to sell the mobile homes to the residents, like just down from your house, sir. And then the residents think they're getting a good deal for $5,500, and then they're paying $100 a month for lot rent. Yeah, but it's an excellent question, ma'am. But can we work to develop that a little bit as a presentation that we'll probably come back to? Because as these places age out, mobile homes are an affordable housing strategy. We even had choo-choo mobile homes at one time. Remember, they were looking to do a race car themed mobile home where they would rehab the mobile homes, and people would actually have would purchase the homes and be refurbished. But Mr. Hare remembers that was a whole different era of things that we went through back then. But let's see if we can't develop that, Chris,
Yes, sir.
if council's wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Benavente?
We're talking about looking back at that 4% funding and just in general investing in this. Chris, there's another project I think I saw on the tracker that you guys are working on already about those 3 areas of concern where ShotSpotter currently is. You guys are looking into what the actual housing security needs are there. More we invest in housing, the more we're going to impact public safety issues. So it's not just like we're spending $6 million on one project. We're actually preventing a lot of issues in some other areas that the city is always having to work on. So I think, when we can invest more in this, focus on more housing secure, I think that's something that you guys are looking into with the folks that you've hired recently to further look into that. And the successes we have in those areas can certainly be applied to the areas that Councilmember McNair is talking about. So I think the more we look at this as a solution on multiple fronts when we invest in this one, that should make us more willing to put some dollars behind this rather than always putting the dollars towards punitive punishment through policing.
Okay, so does anybody have any other questions? So can I get a motion to accept the report? Okay, all right, I have a first by Councilmember Green and second by Councilmember Banks McLaughlin. All those in favor? I'm waiting on one more person, I think. Am I? So there's 8 of us. Oh, thank you, Councilmember Hare. All right, that is unanimous with those present. Okay, we are off to 5.02. I hope everybody enjoyed that because there's a lot of information and a lot of work that they've done.
Good job, Teresa.
Yes, thank you.
I'll be
Yeah.
back in a minute.
Are you leaving? Okay, I guess I need to get a motion to excuse Councilmember Hondros. I got got a first and a second. All those in favor? I'm sorry, the first was Banks McLaughlin, second was Thompson. All right, that is unanimous with those present. Everybody else has to stay.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good evening, council members. As Mr. Cawley had mentioned and called me out a couple times, I'm the housing program manager for the city. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jeff Morin. Been here with the city a while in a couple different capacities and now currently doing the housing program stuff with Chris. And what we have presented for you tonight is a shorter presentation than Chris Cawley just put on, but it is nonetheless important. We're talking about a homeowner program for loan forgiveness. Kind of an overview of the loan program, and Chris made mention to a few of these items in his presentation. We previously offered 3 different housing loan programs. They have all since been phased out or reimagined and reconfigured in some other way. Those programs were a mortgage assistance program, a down payment assistance program, and the mentioned and discussed rehab loan program. Again, all of these were loan programs. We have all switched all 3 of these programs into 2 major programs, those being down payment assistance and rehab, and those are now grant funded. We no longer are issuing loans in any of these capacities. All of these loans originally were designed for low to moderate income households. Chris had mentioned prior that mostly seniors took advantage of this. Those loans that had been written, in some cases, go back on our current books up to 30 years. So we currently have people in our footprint of Fayetteville that still have loans on the books that date back that time frame that received mortgage assistance, down payment assistance, or rehab. Since then, we've switched to 2 new programs that are, again, secured grants. And Chris mentioned this number before, that over the last 25 years that they ran this program, 425 homeowners were assisted in some capacity. Since we have transitioned this program into the 2 that we're currently grant funding, we've now assisted 135 people over those last 2 years. So what we did was we were doing a review of these older programs and seeing what we could do to phase these out or improve on them. A review of those loans showed discrepancies of certain types. There were variations in loan documents compared to the amount of money that was actually spent out on that home, We, while looking through folders, found unresolved foreclosures, bankruptcies, and in some cases, individuals that had received loans that had since passed away, but their loans were still on the books. We had other contributing delinquencies into some accounts Some of those are long, detailed stories. I'm not going to try to get into those. While we were managing these loans, they affected multiple departments across the city, that including economic community development, legal, real estate, finance, all had a hand when dealing with these loans. And we're trying to shore that up and make that a much tighter grouping so that it's not in so many hands in the cookie jar per se. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to council to take action to help us clean up these identified issues. And part of that is ECD's recommending a broad loan forgiveness program that's going to reduce staff time, reduce the financial burden placed on those low to moderate income individuals. That, again, was mentioned prior, they're mostly seniors. And in Chris's last presentation, we had seen that 17% of our population are currently cost burdened in just the homes that they currently own outright. Some of that, this plays into a piece of that because we were requiring repayments on some of these loans. So an explanation of the funding, when we talk about what we're talking about in all of these loans, there were 89 loans in total that were in deeds of trust. Those deeds of trust were written for just over $1.7 million, which again is a good amount of money that we, had tracked. When we were looking at those deeds of trust versus the amount of money that was actually spent, we found a discrepancy a little over $250,000. That had a couple different ways that it could have happened. The individual came in to apply for the original loan. They did the deed of trust paperwork to start with, and of course, we wanted to maximize our return on investment. So they pushed that deed of trust to the maximum amount, which was, at the time, $29,999. Then they went out for repairs on the property, and if that amount didn't equal what was on the deed of trust, those deeds of trust should have been adjusted to reflect the actual amount that went out the door. Some cases that happened, in others it didn't. Sometimes the department internally, rather than redoing it, just readjusted those individuals' payments. But on the books, we've put deeds of trust out for that amount, and there's those discrepancies. So that left us with just under $1.5 million in CDGB funds that went out the door on those loans. You can see a breakdown between our home and CDBG. About $150,000 of that was put into deferred loans. When they were later through the years trying to, again, clean up this program, they found that certain people at a lower income, they were allowed to get a deferred loan. So as long as they maintained residence in that or maintained that as their primary residency, their loan would be forgiven over time. That's currently what we do with our down payment assistance. So again, that has transitioned to where we're at now. So if we factor that out, that puts a maximum amount that could have been collected over all of our loans pushed out at about $1.4 million. We did receive payments through some people, again, about $441,000, and some of those loans were satisfied, which drops us about $900,000 on the outstanding balance that we currently have being managed by a third party. We have a third party company called Amerinet that does our loan managing, which is collecting payments and supplying us with receipts when those are collected. What we found out was there was a balance of uncollected debt, about 30% of the total portfolio, about $270,000, and that was through foreclosures. Again, people had passed away, and a few bankruptcies that we found that as we were doing the research and looking through deeds of trust, we found these documents that had been filed. So that's money that we can no longer collect. So again, that dropped our possible amount to about $644,000 that we were still trying to collect from low to moderate income individuals that were originally, in a lower bracket that needed this assistance. Of that amount, 40% of it is delinquent as we currently sit right now. When we originally addressed this with legal and finance informed us that most of this was in their uncollectible area, that they were not looking to plan on collect this. And what does that mean, for us? That really is about $349,000 that we're asking to be truly forgiven but the portfolio seems much larger than that. Options to consider, we came up with a few of them, and through, again, sitting with the other departments, added one to what we had already thought was a robust plan. One of them is what we're looking for, hopefully, is to get the instruction for ECD, finance, and legal to forgive the remaining balances and close out all of these loans. The second path that we could take was to be instructed for ECD, finance, and legal to work with our third-party collector, Amerinet, to collect on the active payments and attempt to collect on the delinquent debts through foreclosure, debt set-off, or credit collection. The third option would be to instruct ECD, finance, and legal to develop an application that would allow those individuals to apply for a hardship program that would show why we should not collect on certain individuals. And then the fourth was we could be instructed to take no increased action, continue down the path that we're on right now, to monitor these and manage the loans that we have. And we did get information through our legal and finance that this could be a problem under audit. So it's one we're not hoping to go down. So under those four options, kind of broken down the pros and cons of each. The first one being the forgiveness, that remembering that these recipients were low to moderate income homeowners, that grant regulations that they were currently using did not require these to be loans. It was just the best practice at the time. We've since moved away from that and are now doing grant funded only. The loan servicing cost that we're paying to a third party is $15,000 to $20,000 a year out of the general fund. The money that we're receiving back from that, on average, is about $50,000 a year in grant funds. We just went through a briefing with the FRC, and last year through ECD, we spent just under $10 million in grant funding. So $50,000 in program income to what we're already spending, very negligible. And again, the significant staff time that's required through these departments to maintain these loans. Again, they affect several departments. We've gone away from this. Just up to the time when we did the initial brief of this presentation to legal and finance, we already had 90 man hours into it. And that's at different varying of staff levels. Option two would be enhanced collections. Continue to collect payments from the current loans. Enhance collections efforts through foreclosure, debt set-off, and creditors, or credit collection for those that are delinquent. Again, this would continue to financially burden low to moderate income families. Could result in foreclosures of low to moderate income homes. This would increase staff time in all departments, and it still continues to spend that grant funding, or the general fund, excuse me. The note that we have off to the side here, foreclosure costs on average, $2,500 to $4,000 just to do a foreclosure on a property. If we move to debt set-off, the cost of hearings for those is about $120 per hearing, per individual that we would have to do. And we would still be required to manage and maintain foreclosed properties if we went that route. Like, we're not in the business of managing properties. We help people build properties and get people into them, but I personally don't want to be a property manager, and it's not what I signed on for. Option three would be the hardship program. That would include enhanced collections through an application process to show why somebody should be forgiven over somebody else. ECD, legal, and finance would still be required to develop and approve an application, a policy, and review those applications to ensure that it was being applied fairly. Again, this would increase staff time, and it would probably need additional staff that would be out of the general fund. Applications, or the applicants may not qualify, even if they filled out the application, depending on the program and what their income level was. So it could still end up in a foreclosure, a debt set-off, or credit collection. And then option four would be the no increased action. We'd stay exactly where we're at and allow payments to come in as they come in and try to contact those that still happen to owe us and try to go about those ways. Again, like I had mentioned, ECD, finance, and legal, we would, in the process of what we're currently looking at, those foreclosures, those already paid offs, those types of things, we'd still be looking at forgiving without council approval now, about 66% of the entire portfolio. So again, our recommended action is recommend that council take consensus direction to begin a forgiveness program. This would allow us to start the process to close out those loans, to no longer be putting out the general fund money to that third party, and we would be closing out those deeds of trusts and clearing up the titles on those properties. The result, dozens of low to moderate income residents in the city of Fayetteville will have that financial burden removed. The city resources will be freed up from the task of managing those loans and overseeing these programs that we are no longer even utilizing. And the new programs, the goal of those programs was to empower low to moderate income individuals and first-time home buyers, and to keep seniors in their homes as they age. It's part of that rehab program that Chris had mentioned. As we're not only doing those repairs, but a second tier that we're doing is ADA compliance and upfits on those properties. So we're keeping that naturally occurring affordable housing to be in our system, and continue to allow our citizens to live in their homes, in their communities. That is all I have. Open for questions.
Thank you so much. Great presentation. So first, I have Councilmember Hare.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and yes, very good explanation. You didn't try to do like Chris. You gave us every word. But I do understand. I've been studying this item, and it's from the 1.5 from the 1.7 million. We're down to about what, 300, maybe 400,000.
Yes, sir.
Of forgiveness, and to me, that's not a whole lot with all of the amount of money that we're going to be spending with staff to do whatever boots on the ground work additional that you all would have to do, and in any other option below option one. So I would like to just first put a consensus out there. I know unless we're going to have more dialogue, to instruct our ECD and finance and legal to forgive the remaining balances.
Would you like, I've got it. Would you like to make a motion on that?
Yes, make the motion.
I make the motion. Yes, that's true. But you know what? The reason I said it that way is because I thought we had learned that we moved and not so much make the motion. But regardless, I'll make the motion. I thought it was that we move now because item. So it is. Thank you. So as I was stating, I would like to move to instruct ECD and our finance and our legal to forgive the remaining balances and close out the loans.
All right.
Item one, please.
Okay, we have a second by Councilmember Benavente. So we ready? Do we have discussion?
Because it don't make.
He had hit the button. Okay.
That's why my name.
He had it and he took it off and said I would do the second. Do you want to give her your second? Oh, Jesus. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, Councilmember McNair, he had it. Okay. We ready for vote? All right. Everybody, please. All right, that is 6-1, and I guess we have a motion to adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry, we do.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay.
That slipped right on in.
I'm sorry, Councilmember McNair, you were the no vote. You were the no, oh, I'm sorry, I looked at. Oh, okay, I thought it was, okay, I'm sorry. I guess my glasses are dirty. All right. I apologize.
As we move in, Mayor Pro Tem, to this item, which is very simple to understand, you don't have to give us every word on this. And I like the jacket.
Thank you.
46 long.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. My name is Derek MacArthur. I am the Economic Development Manager here for the City of Fayetteville, and thank you all for allowing me to come and present some information regarding a Section 108 loan fund policy that we would like to present to the City of Fayetteville. This is one of the tools that we can put in our toolbox, like Councilman Thompson talks about Knightdale, that we can put in our toolbox to attract some of those developers. The introduction to the Section 108 loans. It is brought to us by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was enacted by an act in 1974. It's not appearing up? Okay, great. By 1974, that gives us a source of financing for a couple different things we can use that for. Economic development, housing rehabilitation, public facilities, and those large-scale projects. A lot of those large-scale projects can't get off the ground. This is a source that we can use them for. Part of that community development block grant program, it allows us to act as a funding source. What we're going to do is we're going to utilize our future and current CDBG funds. It's undertaken, we can use that for large-scale projects. Its unlimited resources are available to invest up front. We use this as a gap funding. It's never going to be the only source, but it definitely can be there to bridge that gap for those financing sources that we want in there. The biggest thing is federally guaranteed loan. It's underwritten by professional staff, and it's reviewed by banks and HUD. And it's always approved by our local council and HUD review. One of the biggest things when we start looking into this, to walk through that process, HUD walks us step by step by this. As soon as we start the application, one of the first things we do is reach out to HUD. Now, how is it utilized? Once again, I talked about we're going to pledge our current and future CDBG funds. Currently, the fiscal year 2025, we can go up to 5 times of what our annual allocation is. Right now, it's around 1.7. That's going to give us about 8.5 of borrowing capacity that we can use. Current development projects, they're going to pay for themselves. We want a developer to come in and be able to generate enough income from their current project to pay the CDBG-backed funds by themselves. Some projects, we can fully fund them. Most of the time, it's going to be for those low-income areas where we're going to do parks and sometimes some sidewalks and those type of facilities we can use. It is subject, once again, to local Fayetteville City Council and HUD review. So once again, I want to reiterate, this is not something that's going to be managed by just ECD. We're going to partner with those places to make sure that this is something that's underwritten and we had a stable plan to go forward with. What are the benefits? I talked about it before about what we can do as economic development, housing, and public facilities. The biggest thing is it's going to create jobs. Everything I do, I focus on a lot of times in economic development is about creating jobs, retaining jobs, and that economic growth. This is one tool in that toolbox that can get us there. It's going to help with construction on those commercial projects. It can help with rehab in those projects, all kind of improvements, infrastructure. There's a lot of those buildings that you talk about going to Knightdale before. Well, the infrastructure is there. With these 108 loans, this is something that can help with that infrastructure to get us to where we can kind of get those developers to kind of come in and look at Fayetteville on a bigger scale. It helps us with housing. Now, all of the housing it can do with site acquisition. That's the biggest thing that it can help with housing. And it's also always about low to moderate income housing. The public facilities, it enables development improvements of those facilities, sidewalks, streets, utilities. Cannot reiterate that enough. Now, typically, it is gap financing. I cannot reiterate that enough. Now, when we want to talk about bringing in our dollars, this brings in, for every dollar we spend, it normally generates another $4.62 from outside sources. That is that public-private partnership that we so want to bring to this area. Now, I'm gonna bring Chris up to talk about some detailed projects that have already been worked out.
You keep going, Mr. Cawley. You do what you need to do.
But y'all could have told me to cut something out of that last presentation. Y'all didn't have any ideas. Yeah.
We all need to learn this.
So Alex, Jeff, and Derek went around and poked around the internet and found a bunch of really good project examples of Section 108 financing being used in communities. And so I didn't want to put any of them up here in front of y'all to answer detailed questions about how they get financed. So I jumped on that one. But I just wanted very briefly, there's about 3 or 4 projects here that I think can give you some thoughts and ideas about what we talk about with this money. So the first one here, this is a 4/1 development, which means that it's got commercial on the ground floor, residential above it. It's a neighborhood grocery store in Cleveland in an urban area. Total cost of the project was $5.7 million. They had a $9 million Section 108 loan. This is one that, Derek mentioned parks in low-income areas, things like that. So we could borrow this money ourselves, not pass it to a developer. Now, that does come at a cost, right? We wouldn't be able to run some of the grant programs that we have. But you can see that here, these folks in New York built a botanical garden in a low-income area. They used $2.9 million of Section 108 financing to get that done. Yep. There's a hotel in Knoxville, historic adaptive reuse project. They only put $2.9 million of Section 108 in it as gap financing to a total $18 million project. I assume that project's got historic tax credits and lots of other financing sources involved in it as well. But that gives you a really good example of something that might even fit in our downtown. Yeah, sure.
So I have a question. When we look at this hotel, and I'm sure it's in a downtown district, and you're probably not going to be able to answer this as I'm talking about, but I'm seeing like 2 different colors of brick. Do you think, is it the HRC that I'm talking about downtown?
Yes, ma'am.
So does that, to me, do we know, did they have an HRC that they had to put in certain windows and certain doors and...
I don't know about Knoxville, but it is very common in historic downtowns to have design guidelines and historic preservation review committees. Yeah.
So I get that. So like when we were in Winston, and I don't know who went down with, that we were down there in the industrial district. If you looked at, when we went through, we were looking at the buildings, and they didn't have to have the old windows so my understanding right now, if there is a window that gets cracked or whatever downtown, you're looking at $900 a window if you can find the window. So my question is, I understand they have it, but do we know in this one, I didn't know if you had seen this one or called them. Yeah,
No,
I would be.
Yeah, no, ma'am. I'm not sure if they have a historic, area
Okay.
or regulations for that there. Like I said, it is very common. Those design guidelines are adopted by councils, and then staff kind of follows the enforcement of that with the guidance of HRC. Again, yeah, and I say this almost every time I get up here, like, this is where y'all have the hard job, right? Okay. Y'all get to say we want to preserve the historic character of our downtown, but that also means that you're balancing that with the cost of redevelopment of that downtown, and that's tough. Yeah, God bless y'all.
So thank you for your last sentence, and I'm good. Thank you. I do have Councilmember Hare. Do you want him to finish, or you're not done, correct, Mr. Cawley?
Yeah, we got a couple more things here.
Okay, we'll do a couple more, and then
So
I'll
I'll
do
just do one really quick that I threw in here that's choice neighborhood involved. So this was a restaurant slash, kind of a grocery place that was done with a lot of different out-of-the-box financing sources. They had a community development financial institution. We got some partners in our community that got deep roots with folks with lots of money who could invest in projects like this through community development financial institutions. They used a 108 loan with $3.2 million. They put $500 of their Choice Neighborhood grant into it. And then they got other grants, could be private foundations and stuff, for $3 million. That all went into what's called new market tax credits, which is another source of financing. This stuff is very complicated. We've got some folks in our community that can navigate it, and there's some folks in other places that, might be interested in doing it. So putting the 108 tool in our toolbox allows us to kind of invite some of those conversations. But I thought this is a really cool project. I know the folks at LIST, the Local Initiative Support Coalition, they do such good work, and their new market side of the house did this project. But saying, hey, here's our policy, we've laid it out nice and clean for you, that's part of what's in your agenda packet, is a huge benefit. So that's kind of the couple of projects that are out there. Again, this is just to conceptualize what can happen with this. I cannot stress enough what Derek said about it being gap financing. Very rarely are we going to be paying the full freight. What I have up here is a little chart that I got from the School of Government that just talks about development process. And so if you're familiar with real estate development, all these things should look fairly familiar. But local government participates in a lot of different ways, or can, right? We can come up with concepts and ideas, shop them around the community, see what we would have buy-in for. We can buy sites and control them, package them, put them together, and make them attractive for redevelopment. We can participate in pre-development. If we buy land, we can improve the land that we own. That's what we do as a city. We can identify and create partnerships, right? So, at one time we had talked about a grocery store, co-op, things like that. And so, you might take some folks from FTCC and FSU and some other groups and be able to kind of facilitate a partnership to bring something to fruition. All of that kind of goes into, there are levels that we can participate in, and some of that is done through ECD. So when we talk about implementing this, right, there's a couple of things to think about. So when we adopted the tax increment grant policy, which is another one of those tools in the toolbox, we brought that before City Council for official action. Banks Law Firm has been helping us draft this policy and the application to go with it. We're happy to bring that back to council. We're also happy to take the direction that staff can implement that policy. We can also start working with it, right? We can identify potential projects, grocery stores, housing developments, water parks, historic redevelopment projects, hotels, business parks, things that bring in those jobs or fall into this program. Then if we find a project that we like, we can do a market analysis, feasibility studies, help bring that forward, help develop the construction costs under the federal guidelines like the wage rates, identify key stakeholders and partners, and develop a detailed project request and put that out. So you can put out a request or RFQ and say, this is what we want to see happen. Do we have any experienced developers who want to come forward? So that's where I kind of want to leave you with this one, is that we're looking for you guys to tell us if you're good with what we've got here with some minor tweaks to adopt this policy. The city manager wants to jump in here.
Right. This was also a great interest of the mayor, and with him being absent, and Councilmember Hondros as well, and Councilmember Davis, I would prefer if we allow you to receive the report, and then we provide a briefing for them similar, and then we would come back with an option for you to tell us where you want to go. I think the only member of council who was here when we did our last Section 108 is Mr. Hare, and that was the Capitol Department Store, which is now Encore Academy. And the council wrestled mightily over that, and that loan did not turn out as it was intended. And Dr. Henderson I would just feel better if we understood and make sure all the council members are at the same accord before we just say we're going to add it to the toolbox, because this was of particular interest to the mayor.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I kind of misspoke. What we have presented you is a draft document, so we want to finalize that. And so, it sounds like the manager would prefer that council approve that, so that's the direction we'll go. We'll finalize this pending tonight and bring it back for council approval. Yes, sir. I think one of the key takeaways here, I know you did have a question over there, Mayor Pro Tem, is that this is an opportunity for our staff, my team back there, to be proactive about soliciting development proposals for specific things, right? Are there buildings downtown that council is willing to put stuff into to try to move forward with revitalization of them, things like that?
So I have Councilmember Hare.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, the city manager stated what I was going to say, because I thought we didn't have really enough, identifying and adopting. So I will move that we accept the report and allow the team to give our members that are gone an update.
I got Councilmember Banks McLaughlin beat you to it.
And my other thing was, if I could ask, I didn't see anything from the beginning to the end about matching funds. Are there any matching funds that we would have to put with this? I didn't see that word match, and we normally have that with CBD.
So there's typically, there is with some of our programs, but not community development block grant. Sometimes if you borrow money, depending on the project, when HUD looks at it, they say, hey, we need you to put $1 million in a fund as like a sinking guarantee. I've had a project like that in the past. And then once that debt is paid off, that money goes back to your general fund. So it kind of depends on the project specific and what HUD tells us to do. But that's what we meant on this slide about additional security is sometimes required. That can be a consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, can we get a vote to accept the vote? I'm sorry, it just popped up. Councilmember Thompson, I apologize.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I had two questions, Chris, and it was about the 108 loan and the 5 years for the CDPG. If you maximize your 5 years, are you able to use it the next year, or do you have to wait until the loan is paid back before you can use what you have maximized for 5 years?
So think about it as a line of credit. We can borrow up to that much at any given time.
Every year?
No, at any given time, right? So that's the max our credit card has on it, and we can give out loans for $1 million, $2 million, $500,000, up to that amount.
So my question is, then, if you use up that $5.8 million that first year on that one project, are you able to engage in another project?
No. If you hit your ceiling on one project, which I would not recommend us doing because that's an incredible amount of risk, but if you hit your ceiling, you're at your ceiling.
And if it is not repaid,
We
then
gotta
you
pay it.
repay it. We repay
pay
it
it.
through future years until it
Gotcha.
goes. That's why it's $8 million now, is because it, you
Right.
got.
Yes, sir.
Next question, it was mentioned about most of these developments are where infrastructure is already current. Are we talking about sewer and water? So we will not engage in any projects where there's not sewer and water?
So let's say a developer wanted to build something and the sewer and water capacity was not there. Let's say the infrastructure was already there, just for sake of argument for a minute. The capacity isn't there and needs to be upgraded. The electrical needs to be upgraded, right? Those are things that this money could be used for that would normally have to be borne by the developer, right? It's also similar to what our tax increment grant could be used for, which would be a property tax rebate for you building public infrastructure. But, there are things out there too where the developers got to build roads and sidewalks and things in order to make that development a reality. They get complicated, but that's absolutely what this tool could be used for. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So are we ready to vote?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. All right, that is unanimous for those present. So once again, I have a motion to adjourn. Everybody
Thank you
have a
all.
good night.